Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. I don't know where you are right now, but welcome to our roundtable, which is entitled Between Allies and Adversaries, Assessing Iran's Stand on Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have three speakers and me. I'm going to chair this discussion today. My name is Mikhail Mamedov. I am a PhD graduate from History Department of Georgetown University, and I have master's degree from George Washington University and diploma from the University of Moscow. And also, I published quite a few work. I published a lot of pieces on history of the Caucasus and a number of works on literature and fiction and the Karabakh crisis. And also, how did I arrive in the United States? My family came to the United States back in 1996 as a result of this Karabakh crisis, Karabakh conflict, the problems which we have been discussing all this time. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Shirin Hunter. Dr. Shirin Hunter is affiliate fellow at the Center for Christian and Muslim Understanding at Georgetown University, with which she was associated from 2005 to 2019 as a visiting fellow and as a visiting and research professor. Prior to joining the center, Dr. Shirin Hunter was the director of the Islam program at Center for Strategic and International Studies, which she was associated since 1983. From 1965 to 1979, she was a member of the Iranian Foreign Service team, serving in London and Geneva. She has published extensively on Iran's domestic and foreign policies, as well as politics of the Caucasus and Central Asia, including their relations with key regional and international players. Okay, this is Dr. Shirin Hunter, and now Professor Alexander, just a second, sorry, Professor Alexander Iskandarian. Professor Alexander Iskandarian is a prominent expert on politics, nationalism, and contemporary history of Armenia and the South Caucasus and Eurasia. He is a political scientist and the director of the Caucasus Institute in Yerevan, Armenia. He's authored many works on these topics and presented numerous papers and published numerous articles and took part in numerous conferences, right? Yes, okay, great. And finally, our third speaker is Ahmad Alili. Ahmad Alili is a researcher on international public policy and regional security of the South Caucasus and its neighboring regional powers. He has participated in several peace-building initiatives, and currently he is director of the Caucasus Policies Analysis Center, CPAC, in Baku-based independent think tank, promoting regional integration and security in the South Caucasus. He is also a lecturer at the Academy of Public Administration, I assume in Baku, right? Okay, thank you so much. Now we will go as usual. Every speaker will have about 2-3 minutes to present his views of the situation in the region. In our case, present his views of Iranian factor, how Iran, what factor Iran plays in this region. And in case of Azerbaijan, in case of Ahmad Alili, how do people from Azerbaijan, how do they view Iranian problem? How do they view position of Iran in this conflict? And in case of Dr. Iskandarian, I recall something interesting story. It was happened maybe 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I visited lecture at, it was a Carnegie Institute, or maybe it was CSIS, where Richard Giragosyan, whom I believe you know who he is, right? You know him personally. he was presenting some lecture at this conference, and he said that I was in Yerevan. At that time, he did not move completely to Yerevan. And everybody was still saying, we are surrounded by neighbors, like such neighbors, Azerbaijanis, Turks, they hate us. Georgians and Russians, they betrayed us. But we have one good friend, and this friend is Iran. And I want you to comment on this. Is there such notion still exists in Armenia? And okay, thank you so much. And please, Dr. Sherin, please, what can you tell us about Iranian vision of the situation in the region? Thank you.
Well, I think that since I only have 2-3 minutes, I cannot really.
You might have 5.
Well, okay, 5 minutes. I cannot mention too many things, but just some basic highlights. Some basic highlights. One thing, though, that before I say this, I have to emphasize the point that the dynamics of the region is far more seriously impacted by the great power policies than by regional actors. I mean, even such a basically activist power like Turkey, which we saw, the whole Karabakh thing could not have been done the way it was without Turkey's, assistance, of course, the Israeli assistance, which was also very important. But one reason that they were able to do Russian preoccupation because of the Ukraine war. Russia was no longer as much careful about what's happening in the Caucasus as it had been before. And also it was willing to make concessions to Turkey and Azerbaijan. What I am going to say is some people may not like it. Iran's policy towards the Caucasus and basically towards Central Asia and so on, what I will call is a defensive policy of a status quo power. The one thing that I believe Iran will insist on, including maybe taking some risky actions, is any major changes in the borders in the region. I think that Iran really insists on keeping its current borders, whether with Azerbaijan or with Armenia. And I think that this became quite clear when there were too much talk about the so-called Zangezur corridor. Iran is a status quo power. However, despite what might appear, both Turkey and Azerbaijan are revisionist powers. For example, Azerbaijanis constantly are talking about southern and northern Azerbaijan. Historically, no validity. I have books and so on, there is no mention of a southern Azerbaijan and a northern Azerbaijan. This was a creation of first the Stalinist regime because they wanted to take Iran altogether. So these are the kind of things that the Iranians are very sensitive for. The other point is obviously what Turks' attitude. Erdoğan, I have to say, I have great admiration for him. He is a very, very clever politician. He plays everybody, both sides against the middle, and then a few other things. And Turks have, I don't want to use big words like pan-Turkism, but Turkey wants to have a direct route to Central Asia. And the only direct route to Central Asia will have to pass through Iran. And so this is also that the Turks are actually, I think, that encouraging Azerbaijan to follow a policy of less than towards Iran. I think that I don't believe that. I think often the fact that they are Turkic-speaking population, Azerbaijan, which happens to be my hometown. I was born in Tabriz. It is exaggerated. I cannot see any Iranian Azerbaijani to rising up in massive revolt against the government. They might do that for other reasons, economic problems or other grievances, but I don't think that they will rise up, actually go and die for whether it is Karabakh or some broad pan-Turkish activity, because you have to realize that these things are not new. I mean, even when I was a child, they were this type of things happening. So I think that, and also Iran, basically, Iran's relationship with Armenians, historically, I don't say that they have been ideal, because obviously, Armenian community did not have all the rights of the Muslims. For example, they could not enter into politics and so on. But as far as I can remember, yes, there were some, stupid people or whatever that were prejudiced, especially overly religious people, but there was no ethnic or other animosity towards Armenians in Iran. I grew up with Armenians. I went to school with them, whether it was in Tabriz, in Tehran, and other things. There was really no difference. So Iran has good relations with Armenia. Historically, also, they had always had good relations. Of course, sometimes competitive, like everything that happens. And of course, Azerbaijan, this again, I'm sure will be controversial, but Azerbaijan, and including the parts that are now called Azerbaijan and were not called as such historically, they were part of Iran. And so for them, these people were not, at least not since the time of the Safavids and so on, they were not strangers. They were a lot of interconnection, intermarriage. In fact, when people have done examination about the DNA of Iranians, other Iranians, and the DNA of the Azerbaijanis, they are 90% the same DNA, because if there has been mixing with Turkic people, it has happened in other parts of Iran as well. So basically, I think what really is, ideally speaking, Iran would like to have balanced relations with both Azerbaijan and Armenia. I'm sorry, I just take a drink of water.
Okay, thank you. We can discuss everything else in
one more word, if I might. And so in the Karabakh question, Iran's position was, because of their own concern, that the territorial integrity, let's say, of Azerbaijan and Armenia should be recognized and not be violated. And since the broad consensus now is, whatever the historical facts, that Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan, that Iran supported actually return Karabakh to Azerbaijan. What Iranians don't want is any further changes in borders with Iran, or anything that could block Iran's access to the Caucasus. I will stop here, and then we can go more into details.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shirin. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Well, maybe Ahmad can tell us how do people in Azerbaijan think about Iranian role in this Karabakh conflict? Because I know that many in Baku accused Iran in supporting of Armenia, and there are a lot of some rumors that different rumors. I do not want to talk about rumors. But what do you think about this problem? And also, what do you think about problem of southern Azerbaijan? With one in the other way, we're already touching this issue. Yes, Ahmad.
Yeah, thank you very much. I believe that this kind of relations, when you are talking about the generally in Iran-Azerbaijan relations, or any like the external powers that used to control the region, like Turkey and the Russia, you cannot always say few points and ignore that, right? The Turkey, Russia, they also were at some point controlling the South Caucasus, so that is That's the fascinating about the South Caucasus foreign policy. So yes, and Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, they were part of the Iran when Iran was ruled by Azerbaijani dynasty. So this is also makes a bit complicated issue. So to what extent Azerbaijanis are seeing themselves closer to the modern Iran. But I would say that in the modern times, of course, there are the narratives created during the Soviet time. So Soviet Azerbaijani narratives, the Southern Azerbaijan narratives, these are the part that Azerbaijan inherited from the Soviet times, that's for sure. But at the same time, I would say that this is the narratives that they were quite good in modern times. They adopted and they present in Azerbaijan narratives in this in the modern times also. So it's very important. But I would say that there are few other issues. I would say that there is like the historical narratives are present there, but still I believe that Iran is a highly pragmatic power with the highly pragmatic foreign policy. So that's what shapes its approach to the region also. And in this context, I would mention two issues: the Azerbaijan-Israel relations and Azerbaijani relations with the United States and the European Union. Azerbaijan-Israel relations, it's a special relations. I would say that there is no doubt about that. So having quite a different religious background and building relations with Israel in this context, it's because like there was a quite intrinsic component, the Jewish component within Azerbaijani culture also, especially in the northern Azerbaijan. So that helped Azerbaijan to move forward and establish more a pragmatic approach with Israel. That is in Iran, that creates quite a bit, let's say, unpleasant feelings in Iran, and that from time to time we see that those narratives, they are reflected on Iranian officials' public speeches. And the second point, I would say that it's about that the Western presence in the region, in the South Caucasus, the presence of the US companies, presence of the European Union in the wider region, that in the early 1990s, that happened because of Azerbaijani geo-economic projects. So all the investment that back then Azerbaijani and Georgian cooperation, it could create a certain interest. And when now you are reading, and I believe the Central Asia program, there is quite many articles published by the US diplomats from the early 1990s, you would see that what kind of approach was there in the early 1990s by the US diplomats in the region, and what kind of regional, let's say, geopolitical dynamic they faced back then. And Azerbaijan was quite an important piece in making sure that there is a stable US-EU component present in the South Caucasus. Now from 2024, it seems a bit strange, but it's the early 1990s realities, and I would say that the whole 1990s, that was the thing. And this is also creates a lot of tension between Iran and Azerbaijan, because from Iranian perspective, Armenia is the country that aligned itself with Russia. It's a CSTO member country. Whole Armenian economy is controlled by Russia. But Azerbaijan is trying to align itself with Turkey, with a NATO member country, tries to have the Western investment on South Caucasus, and so many attributes of the Western presence in the South Caucasus. I mean, a real presence, real political presence that takes place thanks to Azerbaijan, and that creates a lot of tension between Iran and Azerbaijan in this context also. But I've also seen that Azerbaijan up to this moment, it would only react to certain developments. It would not try to create something, and that's Azerbaijan foreign policy in general. Not to push something, just only react because when you are surrounded by big powers, you kind of like to play with quite nicely with all. And in this context, we also see that within Iran, there is a strong, like the interest group that can be named like the pro-Azerbaijani, and also there is a strong interest group that is kind of working totally against Azerbaijan. And Iran's foreign policy being two-voice and the multi-voice, that creates a lot of challenge for Azerbaijan foreign policy in this context. And I'm going to stop here, leaving more room for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ahmad. Okay, Alexander, yes. What can you tell me? What do you think people in Armenia, how do they see Iran? And again, coming back to this Richard Giragosyan words that when he was at, I think it was CSIS, he said, many in Iran, many in Armenia, I'm sorry, I guess now he lives in permanently settled in Armenia. He said that many in Armenia thought at that time that our only ally is Iran. Well, now situation is changing because Armenia is actively looking for allies in the West, Western Europe and United States. And well, it would be a question to Shirin. What does she think? How it would be? What would be reaction of Iran? But now, what people in Armenia think about Iran, please?
Thank you, Mikhail. First, I would say being not an expert on Iran, I can really talk from Yerevan. So
Yes.
to look on Iran from outside, not from inside. Inside Iran, I know Richard very good, and I understand his logic. I wouldn't call it ally. But we don't have a lot of choices. I mean, Republic of Armenia. We have formally at the map, we have 4 neighbors, which are Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Iran. But our neighbor from the west and from the east, I mean, Azerbaijan and Turkey, they're close for us. With Azerbaijan, you have conflict. With Turkey, you don't have diplomatic relationships. Borders are closed, etc. So you have just two neighbors, really open neighbors, not at the picture, but in reality, which are Georgia and Iran. Both neighbors are complicated because Georgian and Russian relationships are complicated, I would say, and Iranian-American or Western relationships are complicated. And both United States of America and Russian Federation are important, big countries, important for Armenia as well. So they usually call it official slogan of Armenian policy, foreign policy was or is complementarism. I would call it nightmare, but it's like that. So you have to have with your neighbors as good relationships you can. Neighbors, I mean Georgia and Iran. Theoretically with Azerbaijan and Turkey as well, but now it's unfortunately not the case. So with Iran, we have good relationships economically, politically, and when you ask people on the streets what they think about Iran and Iranians, usually you will listen very positive words. We have historical ties. Well, we have diaspora in Iran, Armenians and Iran, and they live there. It is one of the strongest diasporas, and we have them there. We have Iranian diaspora in Armenia. A lot of Iranians lives in Yerevan, and they are our neighbors, and we have they are multi-ethnic. You have ethnic Armenians, you have Persians, and you have Azerbaijanis or Turks, how to call them. Maybe a majority of them, of Iranians in our country, are people from the northern parts of Iran, from Iran and Azerbaijan, because that part of Iran which is on our borders is a territory populated by them, and everything is okay with this diaspora as well. We have mosque in the very center of Yerevan, or the main avenue of Yerevan, and this is Shia mosque, and usually people go there. We don't have local people who are Muslims, so people go there. Usually they are Iranians. About 70% of our export-import goes through Georgia, and 30% goes through Iran. It's a lot. 1/3 of our export-import. So generally, I would say that if you ask people, what do you think about Iran and Iranians, you will have a positive answer.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, what else? You know, when this Karabakh conflict just started, or somebody's doing something on the upstairs. When this Karabakh conflict just started, we saw thousands of people rallies in Baku and the central square. It was Lenin Square at that time. Now it's Independence Square, Azad Lake. And then they were carrying pictures of Ayatollah Khamenei and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And at that time, I said that these two absolutely incompatible images, because you cannot put them together. Since Turkey was member of NATO, and no matter what, they were still banging at the doors of Europe, and Iran was represented itself absolutely different model. But there was attempts when this, I said it to my classmates in Baku, I said it to my relatives in Moscow, but how it possible was, well, in Armenia, by the way, among Armenians, there was very strong sense that the West would help us. West would be supporting only Armenia. But my question is to Shirin, is there any fears in Iran that the support or Western support, how does Western penetration to Armenia might constitute fear for modern Iranian government?
Well, I think that it's really very difficult to answer this question without keeping, the historical context. I think that my own thesis is that the whole Karabakh issue would not have reached the level that it reached if it was not manipulated during crucial times, especially in 1992, both by various fighting Azerbaijani groups and also the external powers. And even then, I think in 1992, Iran offered a mediation, and it was quite successful. And even at that time, Cyrus Vance was part of this mediation thing, but it was basically, and the election in Azerbaijan, which I was there in 92 during the election of El-Chibai happened. So I come back to my major thing that these things are absolutely linked with external politics. I am not going to speak on behalf of either Armenians or Azerbaijanis, or even on Iran, because I am not in Iran. I cannot see what they are thinking. I am just, as an analyst, the way I have followed this thing and I understand it. Iran has a major problem. And I do believe that Iran's problems everywhere, whether it is in Caucasus or whether it is in Central Asia or other things, derives from its basic problematic relations with the United States. And I have to say that, and this major problematic thing is because of the Iran's posture on Israel. From the very beginning, again, that I'm following this, when, for example, there were the pipeline issues going on and everybody, from the beginning, it was not quite decided that the whole pipeline should not go through Iran. I think, in fact, it was a very bad policy not to have something, because that would have helped moderate Iran's foreign policy. But the Israelis were adamant that this is not going to do, because they had their own relations vis-a-vis Iran. So given rather difficult position Iran has in terms of its relations with the US and with Israel, and of course, by extension, with Europe. Obviously, if Armenia becomes too close to Europe, Iran might feel a little bit, on edge. But I think that they have managed to cope with this kind of situation. I mean, everybody would have thought that, for example, if Bahrain established relations with Israel, Iran is going to go berserk and probably attack Bahrain or something like that. I think that Iran will cope with this factor as well. And I don't think that the Europeans are going to use Armenia as a staging post, for example, to attack Iran. And in general, I think that with many other problems that is happening in the world, including war in Ukraine, now, of course, everything that is going on in Gaza and consequently for the rest of the Middle East, it seems to me the attraction of an all-out attack on Iran has fallen very much. And I think that the United States I don't think right now really would welcome any kind of confrontation in the Middle East, certainly not with Iran. It will be a very difficult thing to swallow Iran. And yes, they can pummel it, but the consequences of that for the entire region will be tremendous. I mean, even the Turks don't want to do that. I mean, if they keep talking about these things, hoping that all these things can happen without any side effects. But I mean, if for example, Iran breaks up, I doubt that Turkey can survive either. I mean, then you will have a greater Kurdistan, you have this and that. So I think all these things. So my question is to you is that I do not believe that Armenia getting closer to European Union is necessarily going to be at the expense of its, if not warm relations, but at least non-hostile relations with Iran. Armenia cannot afford. I mean, the fact is, history matters. They have always been in Armenia different groups. This goes back to the 80s. They have been pro-Western elements in Armenia, and they have been pro-Russia and well, by extension, Iran. But I would put Iran as a very minor player in the context of which direction Armenia is going to go. And Turks, of course, decided because of their ambitions, because they have always coveted Azerbaijan. You have to remember, I have to insist on that, and I take objection to the appellation Southern Azerbaijan. There is no such a thing as Southern Azerbaijan. The name Azerbaijan was in 1918, the new republic, and at that time, the Iranian government opposed this. And so they added the Azerbaijan of the Caucasus, Azerbaijani Kafkas. So I think history matters, and you cannot, and there has been the amount of historic revisionism in Azerbaijan is absolutely astounding. To talk, they have, well, anyway, I don't want to get into that. So my feeling is that Iran has been surrounded by pro-Western and by, pro-Israeli government. So one more, it's not going to add that much to that. I do believe that this policy has been wrong, and that all it has done is, and the latest example, of course, was the withdrawal from JCPOA, and that by now, I think that we would have had a different outlook in the Caucasus, but I think that this has been the Israeli insistence. And I think that now a lot of people are realizing that Israeli insistence that Iran has to be dismantled or has to, somehow a dramatic change is going to be extremely costly. And I wanted to say to you, Michael, you may have, when you talk about Richard Gagosian, talking about Armenia and Iran being friendly, you may be referring, if you recall, in 2017, I had a conference at not CSIS, but at Georgetown, and the book was published, The New Geopolitics of the South Caucasus, because we thought that then with the JCPOA, a lot of things would open for broader regional cooperation and so on. So my feeling is that nothing major is going to happen much. European Union also doesn't have the stomach to really become involved in the disputes. I think they want to, of course, France feels certain sense of responsibility now and guilt, considering what happened with 100,000 Armenians fleeing Karabakh. They were forced into doing something. Myself personally, I don't expect much from Europe because they have the same constraints that they had before. But I think it might help to show that there are limits to how far you can go to pressuring Armenia, and that at least the Armenian territorial integrity should be respected. Now that the Karabakh issue has been settled, of course, by force, but has been settled. So my bottom line is that Iran will cope with it. One more government going there, Iran will walk away. Others are coming to Caucasus too. India already is there, China is there, and now Saudi Arabia is coming. I think much more worrying for Iran is budding Armenian-Saudi relations. That's much more. But Armenia also cannot do much to antagonize Iran. It just cannot do that too much to antagonize Iran. So I think the way I see it, it will be more of the same.
And again, coming back to Richard Giragosyan, is it possible, unimaginable, is it possible that in case if Russians will cut off oil supply, gas and oil supply to Armenia, is it possible that Iran will be able to substitute Russia supplying Armenia with energy resources?
Well, I think that Iran, in theory, Iran can do that. But the problem is that when during the so-called time that all the Western analysts that, of course, anti-Iran and everything, and it's not just the regime, I don't like the regime either, but the stuff that they are saying is just questioning the very existence of Iran. So that's why I am reacting. But the point is that Russians didn't want, there were a lot of plans for railroad connecting Armenia and Iran. There were plans for energy things. But at that time, Russia didn't want that. You have to realize that throughout the Yeltsin years and during the early years of Putin, Russia had a very tense relation with Iran. And even now, frankly, I would say that the Russians are just using Iran, and Iranians are stupid in terms of following their current policy. They are being manipulated by that. In theory, yes, Iran can supply everybody. Iran can supply Georgia, Iran can supply Armenia, and the Iranians really don't want to compete with the Azerbaijan in this. There's enough need for oil and gas. We saw this during the Ukraine war. Export as much as they want. But the problem is that these are not choices that are made only by Iran and only by Armenia or Azerbaijan and so on. These are major, mega politics beyond the level of the local government. And one last word, I think that Iran's problems basically stem from it's their own fault. It's their own fault. The Iranian policy, the Iranian government, especially the hardliners. I cannot say that Rafsanjani had the same policy or Khatami had the same policy. They offered to deal with America and Americans refused. But Iran's problems stem from its ideological posture and its animosity towards Israel. Now, this may change. The whole Gaza episode has taken the shine of Israel quite a bit, and this might lead to a reassessment of attitudes, but they have to put their own house in order first. And as long as they do, their own house is not in order, they're not going to be able to do. One day Europe will come and interfere. Next day Russia will manipulate. America has been doing this for. So really responsibility lies with the Iranian leadership to come up with a more sustainable position, which is focused on Iran interests, not Islam or Muslim unity or whatnot.
Okay, thank you so much, Shirin. And let's see what people have. I would like to ask us. Thank you for joining us. And okay. Mahsa Tabrizi, I'm master students in Charleston and Carleton University. I would like to ask a question from Dr. Shirin Hunter. Given the historical and cultural connections between Azerbaijan and Iranian people, do you believe that Iran's inability to play a crucial role in Azerbaijan is due to Turkey presence? It seems to me, that as long as Turkey, with its attracting and developing image, act as big brother in Azerbaijan, Iran may struggle to assert its significant influence. So what do you think?
Well, I think absolutely you are quite right. I mean, I have written about it. There has been what I called this in the first book I wrote on Caucasus, came out in '94. There has been a process of what I call Turkeyization of Azerbaijan. And I tell you this, I mean, even certain words that I grew up with, now you cannot say in the Turkish dialect that I spoke. To work means işlamak, and then they changed that into çalışmak. Çalış is a totally different thing. But what I'm trying to say that already culturally, Azerbaijan has undergone incredible change. That and so therefore, for me, that I grew up with this dialect, I can no longer understand if I watch the Azerbaijani television, Baku, I just don't understand anything, to be honest. I watch some old films and it's just like being back to my childhood, but I listen to stuff like that. And this is a dangerous policy also because this is creating greater distance with the, Iranian Azerbaijan, especially now that with the expansion of education, all of those people, even the peasants now speak Persian. In the old days, this wasn't like that. So I think that, in many ways, the connections between Iran and Azerbaijan are very deep. All you have to do to go and just to listen to Azerbaijani music, especially if you listen to what it was 50, 60 years ago, you listen at the poetry, the poems. When I visited Baku the first time in 1990, and I mentioned the name of, the Azerbaijani poet was very famous. He didn't even know who he was. I told to this young man, I said, do you know Wahid? He said, who? I said, well, I mean, he has all this wonderful. So I think that there are a lot of cultural changes are going on. And Azerbaijan, to be honest with you, has become something that is neither a fish nor a fowl. I do believe there is a distinct Azerbaijani culture. I do believe that, and I have written it. But it is a mixture of Iranian culture and the kind of the dialectical Turkic influence. But if you look at the lifestyle, again, watch some of the old, even Soviet era films, you see that it's all the same thing. Tabriz and Baku, those films are almost the same. But now the differences are too much, I don't. And so I also always believe Turkey's influence is much more limited. Turkey's influence Turkey is the moon that reflects the sun of NATO and its American connection.
That's humbling
And
comparison.
that is what it is. There's nothing internal. I mean, look how great Turkey has become. Look at the disaster in after the earthquake.
Yes.
What have they done? I mean, just a little bit. Now, again, as I say, I criticize Iran. Don't misunderstand me. I am so upset with the stuff they have done to Iran, to Iranian culture. If they didn't have all these things, if they had allowed Iranian music, dance, films, and so on freely flourish, the relationship would have been, but no, they have to promote mourning for this and talk about Islamic revolution. So I empathize with Azerbaijani leadership. Of course, they are worried about this thing. And in this regard, I put the blame on the Iranians. But I don't think that, as I wrote in, I think it was in, what was it, 92, I said neither Iran nor Turkey are going to become the examples. They don't have the thing. So I don't know, the competition is going to go on. And I wish that instead of excessive competition and unrealistic ambitions, people would concentrate on pragmatic cooperation, which will improve the lives of everybody and help, stability. So this is my view. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And another question. Actually, I wanted to discuss it, but somebody from the audience asked it. How does Iran consider Turkey-Azerbaijani alliance in case of the military confrontation in southern Armenia between Yerevan and Baku? What reaction do you expect from Iran?
Well, obviously, Iran is very concerned about the whole. What I really, it's not so much Turkey, Azerbaijan. In Iranians, many of them are concerned about this discourse of pan-Turkism, and the very fact that I remember once in some publication in Azerbaijan, somebody wrote that there is no such a thing as Iran, and that Iran was created by Reza Shah. And these are the things that the Israelis are also mouthpiecing. I don't think that Turkey is so, I think Turkey has a lot more sense to get involved in conflict with Iran. I think that Turkey and Iran have reached a sort of, I think, what I call modus vivendi.
Yes.
Yes, they compete. Although Iran doesn't really compete, part of the problem is because Iran is so obsessed with Palestine that it often is not paying enough attention to the Caucasus. If you read some of the Iranian, more thoughtful Iranian authors and so on, they are constantly criticizing that you are allowing Turks or Azerbaijanis just advancing and you're not doing anything. There is a lot of strong lobby in Iran, or intellectual lobby, who would like Iran to take a much more robust position on issues in the Caucasus. But I think that there is no way, I think, that Turkey can do through proxy kind of thing. They can give weapons, they can send Syrian ISIS members to help Azerbaijan in Karabakh or whatever. But I don't think that they would engage in any conflict with Iran. The only occasion that the regional countries could have to make gains at Iran's expense is in the case of a direct conflict between Iran and the US. At that time, then all bets are off. And I don't think that, but I don't believe that Erdoğan, and of course, other groups in Turkey will not do that. Turks are smart. I mean, let's face it, I admire actually Erdoğan's the foreign policy. He's very smart. One day he is with Gaza protester. Next day, he is going to meet Netanyahu. The following day, he is having lunch with Putin. The stupid Iranians, no, they are constantly attacking this and here. So I think that, no, Turks will not get into a conflict with Iran, because Iran also has some levers of pressure on Turkey. I mean, you talk about pan-Turkism. there was the idea of pan-Iranism. If all these Muslim extremists had not come into power, you can start talking of Kurds are Iranian people. I mean, that's a fact of life. Kurdish language is closer to the ancient Iranian language than the current Farsi, the current Persian. So I think that there are, my view is that people in glass houses should not throw stones at each other. That's why I personally am a peacemaker. If you may want to call it, I believe in sort of functionalism in a sense that incremental economic and other cooperation, and forget about this mega narratives of, this and that. I mean, it's really, I don't believe that we are going to be able, and I personally believe regional countries would be wrong to put all their eggs in one basket, whether it is Iran or Turkey. And my recommendation is for them to have good relations with as many countries that you can. Of course, there are sometimes, issues of somebody, big power, big economic issues, and so on. As small countries' choices becomes limited. But to the extent possible, I think one should avoid to really becoming a kind of an instrument for others' ambitions, whatever that might be.
So you don't believe that Turkish aggression to Armenia, so together with Azerbaijani army, is possible?
I don't believe that Turkey
bring
would
Turkey into conflict, into military confrontation with Iran.
I don't believe so. I think that, as I mentioned, Turkey can make indirect assistance to Azerbaijan, as it did during the latest good thing. But if Turkey starts doing anything as such, like taking part in an invasion against Armenia, you have to realize, I mean, Armenia is what, how many, 2-3 million left in Armenia? I think that the entire Western world will rise up for defense of Armenia. And I mean, I know that the West is secular and so on, but there are still some remnants of Christian concept of solidarity. I think then it would be really impossible for this. If Turkey does such thing, I think the other thing that you have to realize in terms of Turkey's ability to do certain things, this goes against the NATO thing. It will even could endanger Turkish membership in NATO. NATO is not a aggressive defense thing. It is supposedly a defensive thing. And again, as I say, Turks are not that reckless to do like that. They will go maybe close, but not to a level of a full-scale invasion or taking part in a full-scale invasion. That's my view. I may be wrong. Tomorrow they may do something and I will get egg on my face. But that's a logical kind of analysis says that they should never even dream of doing anything like that.
Okay, thank you so much, Shirin. Now, the question to everyone. Has Azerbaijan-Iranian collaboration on the transit through between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan through Iran diluted interest in establishing Zangezur corridor? I'm not quite sure what does it mean, because my impression was, is Aliyev still pushing the idea of Zangezur corridor? It's my question to, actually, I would like to start with Alexander. Has Azerbaijan-Iranian relations on cooperation on the transit through Iran somehow affected, diluted interest in building Zangezur corridor? What do you think, Alexander?
I
Yes.
really don't think that Zangezur corridor pressure on Armenia is about Zangezur corridor.
Yes.
I think this discourse around Zangezur corridor is one of the types to press on Armenia. You have discursive pressing, you have diplomatic, you have pressing on the ground, etc., etc. it's not just about road through Armenia to Nakhchivan and Turkey. If it would be like that, it would be able to do this a year ago or more than a year ago. The talkings about roads communication from the main part of Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan and Turkey already were on technical level. They thought about technical possibilities to establish such kind of communication, and it failed. And it failed because I don't think that I don't think that this need of Azerbaijan is about economy, about economic possibilities, because Azerbaijan has railroad from Azerbaijan to Turkey. It exists. They call it Baku Tbilisi Akhalkalki cars, and it really doesn't work. It works once a month. What should you take from Azerbaijan to Turkey? Really? What? Potatoes? What you really need to take from Azerbaijan to Turkey is energy supplies, oil and gas. For that, you have pipelines. You have Baku Erzurum, you have Baku Ceyhan, you have even Baku Supsa. You don't need Armenia for that. So this is not, Zangezur corridor is not about Zangezur corridor, I would say. If they would agree to really normally talk with Armenians, not to press on them, but on Armenians, but talk to them and realized Azerbaijani needs for communications through Armenia to Nakhchivan and then Turkey, they would do it. So I don't think that it is a real problem of communication. As for Iran, maybe should use better. But as I know, Azerbaijanis can go through Iran to Nakhchivan. People, I mean.
People go, of course.
Yeah, they do. So they do have a corridor. You can call it Zangezur corridor or Irani corridors or how do you like. But it's not a real problem. More than that, Armenia proposed, if I'm not mistaken, more roads from main part of other 6, if I'm not mistaken, from main part, the big part of Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan. They proposed checkpoints, etc. You have roads, already roads which you wouldn't build, they exist, etc. So the problem of Zangezur corridor is one of the parts of conflict. I couldn't call it Karabakh conflict already. I would call it Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict because Karabakh really does not exist already. It was deported. So it's about part of problem of relationships between states, not just a way to go through Armenia to elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. And
yes, may I make a addendum to what?
Okay, yes, please.
The thing is that I don't know exactly all the details. I don't have the map in front of me. But the fact of the matter is that this Zangezur corridor or whatever potentially could have, at least according to the Iranian sources, potentially could have eliminated Iran's border with Armenia. And that Iran felt that was part and parcel of the sort of pincer pressure on Iran to kind of cutting all of its outlets to the outside world. I think that is one thing that I don't know. The other thing that I have to say about this whole Nakhchivan thing, this was also a mistake by Iranians. When the borders between Iran and Turkey were negotiated in the 1930s, Reza Shah stupidly agreed to provide Turkey with a border with the, at that time, still the Republic of Azerbaijan existed as part of the USSR, in exchange for some, in Qutur, Khoy, gave Turkey access to Nakhchivan. And that was its biggest problem, biggest mistake, because if that sliver didn't exist, none of these border issues would have come. I mean, Nakhchivan is about 120 kilometers away from Tabriz. I mean, it's not like it's, but that's what, this is a lot more difficult. There's a lot more symbolism involved in that. And some of these things is really also part of, I mean, you remember, for example, I don't want to get into history, and if some people want to read, but history is important. And there has been so much revisionism that it's just, I can't believe this. I really honestly can't believe the stuff that some people are saying. But I think that the history, you know, matters, and I think that these are the whole border issues, the whole issue of so-called southern Azerbaijan and whatever. These are very much linked to the concept of Iran's territorial integrity and its own very existence, and the idea that Erdoğan goes and talks about Iranians stealing Azerbaijan from. I mean, this makes me laugh. It's students. Iran fought 2 bloody wars to defend us. And then, you know, the whole Bakhtiar Vahabzadeh, I can't believe how anybody can say this. I have to say it because a lot of people don't know this, and it's not in this. It says Iran conspired with Russia to divide Azerbaijan. Abbas Mirza died because of all the fight in there. How can a country conspire to lose an important part of its land? I mean, these are the kind of things they are talking. As an Iranian Azerbaijani, I just can't understand. They are destroying my history as well. So I think there's so much, and all of this largely because of Middle East politics. I remember the late Richard Havanesian in '93 invited me to the for a panel at the Middle East Studies Association, and talking about the relationship between the Middle East and the Caucasus. And in that, I said it would be a mistake to look at the Caucasus through the Middle East prism. But that's what they did. That's what they did. So many of these problems we are seeing is the after effects of this kind of looking at Caucasus through the Middle East prism. If they had just allowed the countries there, including Turkey, to you know, to work this thing out, all these things would not exist. I remember when first troubles in Azerbaijan started, and they were demonstrations and so on. Turkish Özal said that Turkey should not interfere in these things. Azerbaijanis are Shiites. And then, of course, the others started criticizing it. So I think it's very important to look at the background, how we came here. And certainly the historical distortion of Iran and Russia and so on and so forth, it's just unbelievable. I mean, the second Russian-Iranian wars started because Azerbaijanis in what is now the Republic of Azerbaijan complained to the government, to the Shah, that Russians are mistreating us. And the ulama started saying that, you know, the king has to go and protect them. And now to say that Iran conspired to divide Azerbaijan, or that the Safavid were Azerbaijani kings, not just Safavid, everybody. I mean, it's you know, this is the, and frankly, Safavids originally, Sheikh Safiuddin Ardabili was either from northern Iran or from Yemen. I don't know. Historians are, are divided on it.
Okay, yes. And Ahmad, what do you think about, actually, it was a bit confusing question. What do you think about the situation with
Well, I believe there are so many points like that. I can even talk without your questions like that. If you want to address those questions like that.
So there Zangezur corridor, and is this idea of Zangezur corridor still exist? Or I think Anne Phillips, she said, believes that the idea of building road through Iran led to made to Azerbaijani government to abandon idea of Zangezur corridor, which I don't think so, and I don't think so. Actually, by the way, I heard.
Frankly,
Yes, go ahead.
frankly speaking, there were quite many interesting points, and reacting to all of them would take another 2 hours, right? But I want to focus on 3 issues, and I believe that I am a public policy analyst, so I try to analyze let's say the historical context. Is that like that now suddenly I understand that what's the importance of the history, like thanks to Shirin, I kind of feel that like that narratives. So but like as a public policy, I'm kind of like the more focused on the much recent events, frankly speaking. So and that is kind of like the vision from Iran and Azerbaijan, that they are quite in this context. They are fascinatingly, let's say, from different worlds completely. So that kind of like sheds light to a lot of issues, and I'm very thankful, Shirin, for those points. At the same time, about Zangezur corridor, I would say that I mentioned it, that Iran's narratives are very historical. Iran's foreign policy is very pragmatic. And that creates additional problem in this context also. For example, Iran is not happy when Zangezur corridor passes through Armenia. Iran is very happy when the same transit link passes through Iran.
Yes.
You know, like this is like if that cuts your like the connection with Armenia in when it passes through Armenian soil, why it's not a problem when it passes 5 kilometers into the Iranian border, right? So this kind of
there is a question of statue. There's
yeah,
this question of, yes.
No. There is like I understand what you say, but the thing is, it's basically if and I believe that Prime Minister Pashinyan once said that it's happy to provide the same rights for the same status for the corridor that Iran presents. And when we were having a desk meeting, I said that corridor through Iranian territory is going to pass through the territories habited by Azerbaijanis. Can Prime Minister Pashinyan do that in Armenian soil? So this is another issue, right? So there is this nuances. But also, I would say that the second issue, that what makes Azerbaijan quite a bit, I would say that looking different to the issues. For example, Iran collected vast amount of army to protect Iran's sovereignty. Last year, there was quite a big army corps, Iranian army corps, sending quite a clear signal to everyone that if there is something, Iran is to protect Armenia. So did Iran do anything like that for Azerbaijan for the last 30 years?
But how can I do?
So that creates a lot of impression in Baku that, well, there is quite many these kind of issues. Also, there is the third issue that I would say that makes right now many policymakers in Baku very, let's say, uncomfortable. The thing is, I'm seeing that Iranian ambassador in Armenia, he basically for the last 2 weeks, he makes quite a lot of public speeches. His reaction to the regional developments, now it's you can see more news about Iranian ambassador in Armenia than Maria Zakharova, Russian MFA spokesperson, comments, right? For the last 2 weeks, he is quite like the active. He's trying to make a position, and he constantly repeats one thing. And Shirin also mentioned that Armenia moving toward the European Union, United States is not a problem. That's not against Iran's interest. But and Azerbaijan would love to hear something very similar from Iran toward itself. And when it's about Azerbaijan building connections with European Union, Azerbaijan building connections with USA, Azerbaijan building connections with Turkey, building connection with Israel, the very first thing, like the Iranian decision makers publicly they say, it's like there should be no presence of the third powers in the region, right? And actually they would say that when it's about Azerbaijan, that the regional problem, there should be no presence of the external third powers in the region, and the regional problems should be resolved by the efforts of the regional countries. So yeah, exactly. So exactly. So like these three issues, like the when Zangezur corridor passes through Armenian territory, that's big no. But when it passes through Iranian territory, that's good. When Armenian territory, like there is some sovereignty perceived, like the threat toward that, Iran is there to help Armenia, but doing nothing when Azerbaijan was under the same conditions. And the third issue, again, like when Armenia tries to be actively engaged with the powers in the European Union, United States, that's not against Iran. But when Azerbaijan tries to do that, that's also. So there is quite many other issues, I would say that. Like that yesterday, Iranian ambassador in Azerbaijan announced that it's called back. You know why? Because the lady who took interview from him, from like the Iranian ambassador, that lady was not like the appropriately dressed, and there also you could see Azerbaijan flag in the back. That was the reason for calling Iranian ambassador in Azerbaijan back to Iran and replacing him. So this creates a lot of tensions in Baku. And again, like that, Baku is a bit reactive in these issues. Baku not trying to create something new, again, because there is a quite big interest groups within Iran that appreciates the relation with Azerbaijan. Baku sees that and wants to build relations with those interest groups, so the friendly voices. But at the same time, when you have this kind of, let's say, the messages that creates a quite uneasy situation among decision-making circles in Baku, and I believe that that creates a problem also. But I'm always saying that when you have some tensions in Azerbaijan relations, wait a bit, it's going to get better.
Well, hopefully.
When everything is beautiful in Iran-Azerbaijan relations, and I'm also saying that wait a bit, it might get a bit worse, right? So the Iran-Azerbaijan relations, it has its own logic. That's partly because of the historical similarities that we share. There is so many connections, cultural connections, and it plays a role. So I hope that I could explain the points that but there's so many things. I have 4 lists full, like I would comment. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have just 4 minutes left. Is there any objections about the notion of Zangezur corridor from Alexander or from Shirin? Do you have to add something about Zangezur corridor?
I want just to say something that as a positive thing in order to prevent misunderstanding. First of all, I want to say to Ahmad that Iranian foreign policy is stupid. The Iranian diplomats are not well trained. They are not appointed for their, diplomatic finesse or their ability to be sensitive to the conditions of the host country. But I would like to add that one reason, however, that Mousavi, if I am not wrong, his name was Mousavi, was called, that he was an appointee of Rouhani, Hassan Rouhani. And so these people are just kind of house cleaning. So if it wasn't for the young lady's attire, I think that probably they would have found a different thing. I think, yes.
That's just 3 minutes left. 2 minutes left. I'm sorry.
I know. The only thing that I would recommend, I think, to be honestly, and there are some Iranian Azerbaijanis who don't feel like me. Maybe I am of a generation which is different. The new generation might be different. But a very good thing, if you want to improve relations with Iran, I'm not saying you should or that it's a good thing. I mean, after all, the government has to decide on its own interests. But I think that stop talking about southern Azerbaijan and the fact that Iran stole Azerbaijan. I think this really cuts to the very foundation of Iranian sense of identity. And Iran is also a country that has been invaded. I mean, after all, Iranians did not take over Turks. It was the Turks who came all the way from Central Asia and took over parts of Iran. So I think that everybody has to be sensitive to this. But this question of southern Azerbaijan is a very, very sore subject.
Yeah, thank you, Shirin. Thank you so much. Alexander, anything to add before we finish?
A couple of words.
Yes.
Politics is politics. Double standards, triple standards, etc., is a norm of politics. It is usually and everywhere. So it's like that. Sure, you have problems everywhere. You have problems with the double standards. You have problems from looking from Iran on Azerbaijan, vice versa, from Armenia, etc. It is normal, and we should live in this reality and try to build something in a region which is quite complicated, and we will have these double standards, triple standards, because you just cannot exaggerate. It's like that. Stop here.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we are done. We are out of time. I would like to say thank you to all participants. Thank you for your participation in our discussion, and thank you for everyone who attended this roundtable. And my apologies to those people whose questions we were not able to answer. Thank you, and I hope to see everyone in the nearest future.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thank you.